The top stories live from the Sky News City studio. Signs of stability in the jobs market. The UK unemployment rate unexpectedly falls despite the country being in lockdown. Taking the fight to Amazon and Netflix. We hear from Discovery on its merger with AT&T to create a new streaming giant. How reaching net zero could come at a much cheaper cost. And why it's been a boom period for companies looking after home repairs and improvements. Good morning. This is Ian King Live, an hour of business and economic news from the heart of the city. Well, we start with some better than expected news on the jobs market, with new figures from the Office for National Statistics showing the UK unemployment fell during the period between January and March. That's despite the country spending that time under lockdown. Well, while it's a positive headline, there are concerns that the number of people claiming furlough could be masking the true scale of unemployment. More on that in a moment. But first, to the figures. The UK unemployment rate fell to 4.8% during the period. The 3 months to the end of March, that was down from 4.9% previously. Well, according to the Office for National Statistics, the number of UK workers on payrolls rose by 97,000 between March and April. But the total figure of those on payrolls is still down by some 772,000 from when the pandemic struck. Well, joining me now is Ruth Gregory. She's senior economist at Capital Economics. Ruth, very good morning to you. I mean, there is a lot of evidence of hiring picking up, isn't there? Not least those figures in April, which I think were the best in 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the figures were pretty encouraging, really. We're seeing clear signs of improvement. Payrolls are now clearly trending upwards. The unemployment rate edged down. Job vacancies continue to recover. So I think really encouraging signs that perhaps most of the fall in employment is now behind us. Of course, there's still some way to go. It's clear that the number of employees on payrolls is still 772,000 below pre-pandemic levels. And we may still see the unemployment rate creep up a little bit this year as the stronger recovery tempts workers back into to start searching for work again due to the stronger economy, and those that start to search may not find a job quickly. But I think the figures overall pretty encouraging, suggesting that the jobs market is now on the front foot.
Yes, and the earnings growth, Ruth, particularly robust still as well. Is that because a lot of the lower paid workers remain on furlough?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. The pay growth figures were quite strong. Pay growth stood at 4% in March, and it may even rise to over 8% in the summer, which would be the fastest growth rate since the early 1990s. But I think we do have to be a little bit careful in interpreting those figures. A good chunk of that rise is due to it's a mirage created by lower paid workers losing their jobs, and that means that the average earnings growth rate increases even if no one actually receives a pay rise. And it's the change, obviously, in the actual amount paid out in wages that really matter for firms' costs. And if you remove these effects, pay growth has actually been pretty subdued and remained close to 2%.
And it's worth pointing out that 11% of workers remained on furlough as at the end of April, beginning of May. I mean, would you expect the jobless rate to creep high? You were hinting at that just a moment ago as government support gets kicked away.
I think we may see the unemployment rate creep up, as you said, later in the year. There are still a large number of people on furlough, and we may start to see people starting to look for work again as the economy recovers, and that may mean that some of those people may not get a job quite as quickly, which may mean the unemployment rate rises a bit. But I think really it's been pretty encouraging, and I think that the bulk of the falls in employment now are probably behind us.
Of course, except we've got a whole bunch of school and college leavers about to come onto the jobs market as well. I mean, what's likely to be the overall impact of that on the figures?
Yes, I think obviously the job losses have been concentrated in younger workers, those under the age of 25, and particularly in the hospitality sector. So we have seen a bigger hit, a more worrying hit for those people, and that's certainly something that we need to look at in the coming months, and certainly an area of concern.
Worth pointing out, isn't it, that the labour force participation rate during the period was flat. I mean, that kind of suggests that some people who lost their jobs during the pandemic have decided not to look for new ones.
Yes, I think that's right. The lack of opportunities over the pandemic meant that people simply just stopped searching for work. And that has been a key reason why the unemployment rate hasn't risen particularly or as far as many people feared even a few months ago. So as people start to look for work again, that may mean that participation rates start to creep up again this year.
And of course, there are still concerns about long-term unemployment. That seems to be a particular bugbear still.
Yes, I think that's right. We have seen the long-term unemployment rate creep up, and it's been particularly for those under the age of 25, so younger workers who have perhaps stayed in education for longer. And it will be key, really, to whether the crisis causes longer-term scarring effects on the economy. That will be key whether those people start to look for work again.
And separately, Ruth, we also had productivity data this morning. That was pretty encouraging, but I guess masked by the fact that a lot of less productive workers are on furlough.
Yes, I think the figures are slightly distorted at the moment. We won't really get a clear picture until the furlough scheme starts to unwind in the summer and ends at the end of September. So it's difficult to take a reading really from those figures at the moment, and we'll need to look to those that data later in the year really to get a clear reading.
All right, Ruth, good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Let me run you now through some of the other big business stories around this morning. And there are an awful lot of company results to tell you about, starting with Vodafone, whose shares have fallen by almost 7% this morning after the mobile giant's full-year results came in shy of expectations. Vodafone, whose biggest single market is Germany, reported adjusted earnings of €14.4 billion. That was down by 1.2% on the same period a year earlier. Well, that was as sales fell by 2.6% to €43.8 billion, which Vodafone said reflected lower revenue from roaming, visitors and handset sales, adverse foreign exchange movements and the disposal of Vodafone New Zealand. But Nick Reed, the chief executive, insisted that growth had accelerated towards the end of the financial year. Price rises in some of its main markets helped the tobacco and vaping firm Imperial Brands raise half-year operating profits by 8% to £1.59 billion on an adjusted basis. Well, the company, whose tobacco brands include John Player Special, Gauloises and Lambert & Butler, said this was despite a 4% drop in volumes due to lower sales in its global duty-free business as international travel was significantly curtailed. Well, Imp said it raised its share of the UK market, where it was already market leader, to nearly 41% following the launch of its Embassy Signature range. Commercial property giant Land Securities saw its pre-tax losses balloon to nearly £1.4 billion in the year to the end of March. That was up from a loss of £837 million in the previous 12 months as the pandemic took its toll. Well, it partly reflected bad debt provisions of £127 million against concessions to tenants or rent that it no longer expects to collect. There was also a revaluation of the company's property portfolio that cut the value of its assets by nearly 14%. The chief executive, Mark Allen, he said he'd been encouraged by a return to shopping as the easing of lockdown measures began in April, which he said appeared to be driving a strong return to the company's retail assets, which include the Waitrose and Trinity Centres in Leeds and a 30% stake in Bluewater in Kent. The company is building the world's largest offshore wind farm on Dogger Bank in the North Sea, says it expects to create more jobs from the project than previously expected. Dogger Bank Wind Farm and GE Renewable Energy said that delivering and operating all three phases of the project would now lead to 470 jobs being created, which was almost twice the original estimate. Well, those new roles bring the total number of UK jobs that will be created to support the wind farm to almost 3,000 so far. And Royal Dutch Shell will face a vote on a climate-related shareholder proposal at its annual meeting today. The Dutch activist group Follow This is calling on Shell to cut carbon emissions more quickly. Shell has set a target of zero carbon emissions by 2050, but the group, which is backed by a leading Dutch pension fund and the billionaire hedge fund manager Sir Chris Hohn, says the company is not going about it in the right way. BP last week saw off a proposal from Follow This, which was nonetheless supported by nearly 21% of shareholder votes. Now, more on the $43 billion merger that could help create a new streaming giant. AT&T, the owner of Warner Brothers Studios and HBO, is to combine its media assets with those of Discovery. The new company, which is yet to be named, is set to spend around $20 billion on content. That's $3 billion more than Netflix will spend this year. Well, it will build on an impressive stable of content that will soon bring the Harry Potter and Batman franchises, the news network CNN, and Discovery's home cooking and nature programmes, all under one roof. Well, joining me now to talk about this, John Briac-Perret. He's the President and Chief Executive of Discovery International. JB, welcome to you. Now, Netflix has 204 million subscribers worldwide. Disney Plus has 104 million worldwide. Together, I think you and Warner's are yet to reach 50 million. Are you going to be able to close the gap on these guys?
Well, I think, look, this is a beginning. These are two incredible companies. I think what was most exciting to us is when you look at the world and the way that the future is developing in the streaming space, what's clear is scale and content offering is going to matter. And you're combining here the greatest real-life entertainment company in Discovery with one of the greatest scripted and news and information companies in Warner Media. And the combination of those two, when we think about sort of consumers and what the consumers want, which is, great broad set of content and able to actually deliver that on a global basis, I think the power of both of those great content companies coming together to offer a simple and very compelling content offering to consumers everywhere and around the world, we're confident it's going to be an incredible road ahead.
It is indeed. But I mean, Netflix and Disney have a hell of a head start on you.
Look, those are two great companies. And I think a lot of this is all about the storytelling and the content. And the reality is also Warner has a various different approaches they've taken over the years of developing their streaming service and going to market directly, as well as continuing to license content in some markets. And so it's not a fully apples to apples comparison yet, because over the next couple of years, more and more of that content that they used to license to third parties will come back to them, and they'll be able to launch in more markets, and we'll now be able to launch in more markets with this offering. And I think the other thing is, we have a way more compelling content proposition when you see these two companies together, which is a lot of the logic which drove the transaction.
You raise a very interesting point there. I mean, that has implications, what you've just said, for Sky News' parent company, Sky, which, of course, shows a lot of HBO content like Succession right now. In time, that is going to revert back to Discovery, from what you're saying.
Well, look, I think we have a lot of great partnerships, including with Sky and Comcast, the parent, across markets. So we'll be working with all of our partners to figure out ways to bring the content to market. But I think generally you can imagine that the goal is ultimately to bring all that great content and bring it together in a compelling streaming service, whether that be one or two, is obviously the two you rightly pointed out. We have Discovery Plus and HBO Max currently exist as sort of standalone services. We'll be looking at how exactly to bring that to market in the best way for consumers going forward. But certainly the goal will be to continue to make those offerings richer, better, and deeper, using the 200,000 hours of library that both of these companies have, which is really unprecedented in the market.
You've preempted my next question, JB, which is, it makes an awful lot of sense to bring HBO Max and Discovery Plus together on one platform, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think, this is one of the things we're going to study. The deal came through in a fairly quick fashion, as you probably heard. And so we haven't had a lot of time to really do the proper amount of research and study and look at the data and understand how best to bring these two propositions to market. But that's something we're going to undertake as we start planning. We've got several months. Certainly, we've said the transaction is not going to close till probably first half of next year. So we have some time to do more homework and look at the data, and we'll figure out what the best way to bring that proposition to market is for the consumers. And it may be even a regional approach. You look at someone like a Disney, and they've had a different approach in North American market versus Latin America versus other parts of the world. And so I think that's someone we'll study, and we'll get smarter, and we'll come up with what we think is the best proposition for the consumer.
I mentioned at the beginning the amount of investment that you're promising. Looking at the two businesses, Warner's has clearly been underinvested in during AT&T's ownership. It's also lost a lot of talent over recent years. I presume that's going to have to get the lion's share of investment.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, Discovery and our entire belief is a creative first company. The stories we tell and the great stories we tell is at the heart of our company and our DNA. It's still obviously at the heart, I think, of HBO and Warner. Our goal is, as you mentioned, the $20 billion. Our goal is to continue to look at driving efficiencies in every other part of the business, but continue to invest in the content, because the content of the great stories is what's going to win the day. The product, whether it's linear or streaming, at the end of the day, it's all about great stories and great content and great characters. And so we want to be a very friendly, creative house that ultimately invites the best directors, the best writers, the best actors, the best producers to work with us and tell their great stories on a global canvas that we think uniquely Warner and Discovery will be able to do.
Now, your chief executive, David Zaslav, is going to be heading the combined business. I was reading in the FT this morning, they're comparing him with Rupert Murdoch, Walt Disney and Sumner Redstone. That's quite some billing to live up to.
David is a incredibly smart, incredibly driven and passionate. He is the Energizer Bunny of CEOs. I've had the great privilege of working with him for almost 20 years now. And it's been an amazing experience, a real mentor to me, someone I've learned a ton from and I admire enormously. And so you need somebody like that who has enormous amount of passion. And frankly, this deal wouldn't have happened without David. And it's a great testament to his belief that in some ways, he's reinvented this company. He's changed the profile of Discovery. When he first got here, he then led us with the Scripps acquisition, which got us into more, really being the leader in real life entertainment with HGTV and food. And now this is the next chapter. And I must say, we all at the leadership team who've worked with him for many years couldn't be more excited that he is going to be leading the charge here over this exciting new world.
I was very struck yesterday when he reeled off the assets that the two businesses will have under one roof, that he led off with all those DC Comics characters, Batman and Wonder Woman and so forth. He clearly feels that those have been underinvested by Warner's, perhaps not done as well as some of the Marvel assets that Disney's bought.
Look, I think all the credit to Disney, who've done an amazing job with the IP that they have. And I think the opportunity for us is this is a world of taking great intellectual property and trying to do even more with it. And I think when you look at what Warner has, it's a treasure trove of intellectual property. And so I think whether it be the DC library, the Hanna-Barbera, all the areas that we want to try and continue to explore. And I think one of the things that's particularly exciting with their range and our range of content is there's not a genre that we don't cover, from real life entertainment, factual content, lifestyle content, scripted entertainment, scripted movies, news, kids. I think that's really the most compelling part, is that separately we had very compelling propositions. But the video business is increasingly a business where consumers want simplicity and they want choice. And when they go to one place, they want to find a breadth of offerings that, depending on their moods and interests, they can be satisfied. And so I think as we bring that together, we have literally every genre that a family could want. And we're super excited to find a way to bring that to the consumers in a really easy and functional way. And so David's going to be leading the charge, and we're going to be working with him and the Warner team, the incredible Warner team, to figure out how best to do that.
All right, Hanna-Barbera, who doesn't love a bit of Scooby-Doo? JB, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Likewise, Ian.
Well, still to come here on Ian King Live. Can we reach net zero at a cheaper cost? I'll be discussing a new climate report with Baroness Brown next. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, could the cost of decarbonising the economy and reaching net zero by 2050 be done much more cheaply? Well, a new report out today from the Carbon Trust says yes, if more flexibility is embedded across all energy sectors, with a potential saving of up to £16.7 billion a year. Big money. Well, the chair of the Carbon Trust is Baroness Brown of Cambridge, who joins me now. Baroness Brown, welcome to you. There's a lot of assumptions in all of this. What are the main obstacles to a net zero energy system?
I I don't think there are obstacles to a net zero energy system. This is something we have to deliver and something we can deliver. It will require a fair amount of investment, but I think we can see that investors are now very keen to invest in things like offshore wind and solar, the sort of renewable technologies that we need. And of course, we now have the government's target of getting to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And as our new report and the Committee on Climate Change say, we probably need to be at something like 100 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050. And that's one of the reasons why flexibility is going to be so important. It's going to be so critical to have a lot of different ways available to us to match the energy demand at any time with the provision of energy, because demand varies during the day, but so does generation, particularly in a system with very high renewables. So we'll generate a lot when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining. That may not exactly match the times we need to use it. So flexibility enables us to shift the demand. It enables us to store the energy. It enables us, for example, to produce hydrogen. All of these are features of a flexible energy system.
Well, indeed. So, I mean, is there a place for nuclear in that energy mix?
Well, the Committee on Climate Change in its models still has nuclear. The only issue of to how much nuclear is probably going to be the cost. But of course, nuclear also, just as renewables, nuclear also needs flexibility because we don't have a continuous demand during the day, and yet nuclear gives us a fairly continuous generation. So again, we need flexibility to be able to shift demand or to be able to store that energy when the two are not matching.
Now, your report today, I was struck by one thing, which is that you've got a lot of input from the electricity industry and a lot of the big players there involved, but not the likes of BP and Shell, who are also playing their role, they would argue, in transformation.
Well, of course, they're moving into the electricity business, both BP and Shell, in their transformation to become low-carbon companies, are starting to invest very significantly in offshore wind and other renewable assets. And of course, our report takes on board using gas to produce hydrogen, and obviously capturing the CO2 and storing it as you do that. And in fact, looks at the benefits of both being able to produce hydrogen from electrolysis, but also being able to make hydrogen from methane. And that also adds flexibility into our energy system. So that's part of what we look at in the report.
All right, Baroness Brown, appreciate you joining me this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come here on Ian King Live. What's been going on in the events and exhibitions market? I'll be speaking next to the Chief Executive of Hive Group. Don't go away. Welcome back. And during the pandemic, the demand for high-quality healthcare spaces has never been higher. One company serving that demand is Assura, the primary care property investor and developer. And in full-year results posted this morning, the FTSE 250 company said taking on a record number of new developments had helped pre-tax profits rise by 37% to £108.3 million. Joining me now, the Chief Executive of Assura, Jonathan Murphy. Jonathan, very good to see you this morning. You must be one of the few property companies that's seen relatively stable income over the last 12 months. Has that attracted a lot of new shareholders to the register?
Yeah, no, absolutely. All our rents are let to GPs and so funded by the NHS. So clearly a very stable income stream. So, yeah, no, the shares have been well supported over the last year, and we continue to attract new investors. In fact, we completed an equity raise this time last year of 185 million, which was really well received. So, yes, continue to be well supported.
Well, you did, and indeed that equity raise was to fund new acquisitions. It looks like you've got through a fair chunk of that already.
Yeah, no, it's been an incredibly busy year. No, notwithstanding some of the challenges of having to adapt to working remotely, the team have done an outstanding job. So we were able to secure £300 million of property additions this year. New medical facilities right across the country. New state-of-the-art facilities like Cinderford here in Gloucestershire that you're looking at now, and other centres right across the UK. So continued high levels of activity, absolutely.
Are there a lot of distressed sellers around of the type of assets that you're interested in acquiring?
Well, not really distressed sellers, no, because the typical owner of these assets are the doctors themselves. So they're the typical owners. So I wouldn't describe them as as distressed. It's more just the ordinary course that as the GPs come to retirement, part of their retirement planning often is to sell off the building, and ourselves as a professional landlord is an ideal counterparty for them, because we'll then work with the occupiers to make sure the premises are to the latest standard, help them with new investments for sustainability, or they need new screens for digital consultations, etc. We're there to help them as they move forward.
We've heard an awful lot over the last 12 months, increasingly about online provision of GP services through outfits like Push Doctor. Is that a long-term threat to your business?
It's definitely a long-term trend. I wouldn't describe it as a threat, because I think the reality is the way we're moving is towards a hybrid model where you'll have some form of telephone or digital triage. But then when you do need to come in and see your physician, it'll be really important that you're seen at a high quality modern facility that's got a range of services. That means you can have that all important treatment done there and then on the site, and avoid the need for you to go to hospital. So there's definitely a requirement for both those physical consultations, and the use of technology going forward. And I think you've seen that in the last week, haven't you? There's been a lot of press coverage this week about the importance of face-to-face appointments, and I don't think that's ever going to go away.
Now, traditionally, as you say, you've partnered with GPs, but you look to be widening this out to hospitals and NHS trusts. What sort of challenges does that bring with it?
Well, we're responding to the same challenge, which is to try and create more capacity in the community. So, what COVID showed us was that the hospitals really need, more capacity in the hospital environment. But the way to do that is to try and move some of those treatments, some of that routine testing, some of those outpatient clinics to another location. And that's what we're looking to do. So we're currently working with Northumbria Health Trust, for example, on building a facility right next to their current hospital, which will provide training facilities for their staff and also some additional space for treatments in the community. So providing additional capacity, but not within the hospital.
All right, Jonathan, we have to leave it there. Good to talk to you again this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the exhibitions and events organiser Hive has reported a 42% rise in half-year pre-tax profits to £27.6 million, despite a collapse in sales. Well, that reflected insurance payouts of £49 million in respect of cancelled events. But the company, which has run events in Russia, Ukraine, China, Turkey and India during the last 6 months, says it's hopeful of a revival in events in Western Europe in coming months. Well, joining me now is the Chief Executive of Hive Group, Mark Shashua. Mark, very good to see you again this morning. Clearly, insurance has come to your aid over the last 12 months. Do you worry that premiums are going to rise as a result of this?
Well, first of all, good morning, Ian. It's good to see you again. So we have these insurance policies, which we reviewed when we first came into the company in 2017. So we're very lucky. We reviewed them and changed them to include the sort of communicable disease. So we have them until the end of this year. So we've had it for 2 years. I mean, premiums have increased, but the type of communicable disease is unlikely that we will be able to get that type of insurance cover going forward. But we are in a good position that we've had it for the whole of last year and also for this year as well.
Now, you're pretty confident that there is pent-up demand for events. What gives you that optimism?
Well, we've gone under an enormous transformation and growth program since 2017 to 2019. So we've reshaped our portfolio from 269 events to now 75 events. Really focusing on market-leading shows. The revenue, the average revenue per show used to be £500,000. It's now £2.8 million on a pro forma basis. So what gives us confidence is, one, we are operating market-leading shows. We operate the main event of its kind by sector and by geography. That's one. Two, and history has always shown that through any form of crisis, customers do gravitate their marketing spend to market-leading shows coming out of a crisis, whether financial and now pandemic and financial. But also, secondly, the strength of our rollovers. Our customers have kept their deposits and their bookings with us, even when shows have not happened 2 years in a row. So it's an incredible testament to the strength of the brand. It's an incredible testament to the wonderful teams that we have across the world, that customers want to still come to these events and come in as they used to do before. So that gives us enormous confidence going forward.
Mark, how much of a hindrance is it to you, the fact that the UK government still has a lot of restrictions on travel?
Clearly, it is a hindrance. I mean, so we have a percentage of, depending on the type of show and the sector that we operate in, it does make it difficult for internationals to come to trade fairs. But we do see that changing as time goes on, as the more, we're very optimistic with the vaccine rollout that's happening, not just here, but now in America and all across Europe and globally. That the ease of restrictions will be lifted for international travel, and then business travel will resume. But the vast majority of our shows here in the UK are very domestic, with some international aspect to it, and the same in America. So it obviously affects us, but not greatly.
Mark, the UK is renowned for having some of the best talent in the exhibitions world. Do you worry that a lot of people have left the industry during the last 12 months?
Well, we made huge efforts to retain the core teams that work all across our market-leading shows. I mean, that was massively important. So retention, well-being is very, very important. But quid pro quo, it's also very important that we have now evolved our offering, that we still do market-leading events and in-person events, whether that's exhibitions or congresses. But we've also adopted and evolved into an omni-channel strategy, which also does offer customers the opportunity to network and trade online. So actually, the capability that we're building is also very much in the digital and the virtual areas as well.
All right, Mark, we have to leave it there. By the way, I gather you lost your father recently, so condolences on that. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Kind of you to say. Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you.
Well, time now for our regular look at what's in the business pages this morning. And the Financial Times splashes with what it says is a row in the British Cabinet over whether or not to grant tariff-free access to Australian farmers. The International Trade Secretary Liz Truss is said to want to do so, but George Eustice, the Environment Secretary, and Michael Gove, the Cabinet Office Minister, are said to be warning that the move could spark a backlash from the UK farming industry. The FT, meanwhile, leads its companies and markets section with the Warner Media merger with Discovery that we were discussing earlier. Well, that story, of course, is also the lead in the business section of The Times, which also reports on a rise in shares of BT yesterday after it was revealed that Philip Jansen, the chief executive, bought another £2 million worth of shares in the company on Friday. Director buying, of course, usually taken by investors to be a good indicator for a company's prospects. The Daily Telegraph, meanwhile, leads with yesterday's warning from the International Energy Agency, in which it says no new oil fields should be developed and no new coal mines opened if the world is to bring global warming under control. Also has a very intriguing story, well, for those of us in the media business, about a power struggle at the publisher of The Guardian newspaper. Well, joining me now is Ruth Sunderland, the business editor at the Daily Mail. Ruth, very good to see you this morning. These BT shares, Philip Jansen had his buying boots out. Quite a show of confidence from him.
It absolutely is. It really is a show of confidence. He's had his buying boots on for some time, as you know, Ian. I think this takes it up to around 10 million of shares that he's bought with his own money. So it's a big show of confidence in his own strategy. He's really at the head of probably the biggest overhaul that BT has looked at for many years. He wants to really convincingly transform BT from what was once obviously a state-owned monopoly to a really cutting-edge tech business. Now, he's got a number of challenges. He was bequeathed with BT Sport by his predecessor, Gavin Patterson. He's got a big deficit in the pension fund, which is going to go through a big revaluation this summer, so a multi-billion-pound shortfall there. And he's got disputes, possibly, or certainly some difficulties with the unions in his transformation. And continuing questions, I guess, as well, over the Openreach division. That's the sort of plumbing of BT. So he's got his work cut out. I must say as well, his personal fortune, I think in the Times today, they said he had around 150 million, they estimated, that he made from WorldPay, which was his previous job. So maybe it's not such a huge gamble in that context.
Indeed so. Now, another story that caught your eye this morning is in the Telegraph. Hold-ups to Davos.
Yes, well, get out the tiny violins, I think. So Davos, as we know, it's a very big elite talking festival, really. Usually takes place, as the name suggests, in the Swiss ski resort. It was called off in January when it normally takes place, for obvious reasons, because of the pandemic. They were hoping to stage an event in Singapore. That's now had to be postponed too. But I think it it might prompt more people to start asking, well, it's 50 years of Davos this year. Has the event really reached its sell-by date? Standard Life Aberdeen, or what's now known as just Aberdeen, without any E's nowadays, they said that last year they weren't going to go to Davos anymore because it was costing them £3 million to attend the event, and they felt that money could be better spent on community goodwill, cleaning out old people's homes and things like that. Certainly, I noticed the difference in my budget. When I send some of my team to Davos, it's always a very expensive enterprise.
It really is. The World Economic Forum, they charge like a wounded rhino, don't they?
They absolutely do. I do question, is this a bit of a vanity project? I think there are often not enough women appearing in proper situations. It is a bit of a preening festival, I think, for the global elite. And, in last year, the event was held right on the cusp of the pandemic, but the pandemic didn't really feature very strongly in discussions. It was all about climate change, which is obviously hugely important, but it did make you wonder a little bit, well, are they really as on the ball as they might be?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm amazed it survived the financial crisis, to be honest, but there you go. In the FT, Ruth, and elsewhere, Dame Emma Walmsley in Glaxo, been in the news a lot lately, but a bit of a boost of confidence for her.
Absolutely. So there was a lot of disappointment, really, that GSK, which is, of course, a vaccine specialist, hasn't so far done better in terms of producing a COVID vaccine. So a jab that it has been working on with Sanofi hadn't advanced as quickly as people had hoped. It's now performed very well in trials. It seems to work particularly well with one dose, which is very positive because it means that it could be used as a booster jab, which we're going to need around the world. And I think significantly as well, GSK and Dame Emma Walmsley have been under siege from Elliott, which, as you know, is one of the more aggressive activist investors. So they've been disappointed. The GSK share price has underperformed AstraZeneca's share price. We don't quite know what Elliott wants, but certainly, Emma Walmsley's been under siege, and this will be welcome to her. She's got a big investor day on June the 23rd, and I think this is going to, put a bit of fuel to her fire when she tries to win the support of her big investors.
All right, Ruth, we have to leave it there. Great to see you as ever. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, with more people forced to spend time at home during the pandemic, it's led to a boom for companies taking care of emergency repairs and improvements. Well, HomeServe, which specialises in plumbing, drainage, boilers and heating, posted its preliminary results this morning with a very positive picture. Revenues were up 15% to £1.3 billion, largely driven by a strong performance in North America. Well, joining me now, the founder and chief executive of HomeServe, Richard Harpin. Richard, welcome to you. To what extent were the results flattered by COVID-19?
I think they were helped because we saw increases in our retention rate as more and more people use their policies, showing the value of our home emergency cover, particularly in the US, retention rate up from 83 to 85%. We had a hit to profits from Checker Trade, where we gave trades half-price membership or free membership in the first 3 months of the original lockdown when they weren't able to do home improvement work. But we've held on to our trades. In fact, we've grown them by 11% to 44,000 paying trades on our platform. We do think that coming out of this pandemic, HomeServe is going to be a big winner. It's going to drive more work to our trades, show the value of our home emergency cover as people live in the homes, work in the homes ongoing more than pre the pandemic.
Richard, I know you're on a recruitment drive at the moment. How many people are you looking to take on this year?
We've just recruited another 100 people into our UK call centres. We're on the lookout for 60 more directly employed plumbers for our UK team. And we're looking at significantly growing the number of trades on our Checker Trade platform. There's lots of people setting up in business to do home emergencies and repairs. So Checker Trade, a really good place to pick up extra work.
I mean, British Gas have let go a few hundred gas engineers recently. Potentially, could you be in the market for some of those?
Absolutely. Yeah, we see a strong acceleration in our growth in the coming 12 months. Our star performer is our US business, though, where we saw customers up by 7%, profits up by 27%. We delivered $138 million of profit, well on the way to our $230 million midterm target in the US.
Yeah, how long is it going to be before the US is the biggest single market for you?
It already is. So it's our biggest profit generator. It's got 4.7 million of our global 8.4 million customers. And the exciting thing is we're only achieving a 7% penetration in the US. The market is underpenetrated. We're still only marketing to half of American households. But we're talking to 300 utilities about launching our home emergency programs. Those 300 utilities account for 58 million households. So there's strong growth to come in North America.
The pound is up by a fifth against the US dollar since March last year. That must be a headwind that you probably weren't expecting.
It is. That will have around a £7 million headwind for the current year. But we are expecting to see very good levels of profit growth. We increased the dividend 10% for the year just gone as an indication of the future growth and the cash generative nature of our businesses.
Now, you touched just now on Checkatrade, part, of course, of your Home Experts division. There's a lot of talk among the DIY multiples recently that people are doing more work themselves rather than getting in the experts. Is that a longer-term threat to that part of the business?
I think it's both. We've just done a survey which said that 83% of homeowners want a house refresh this year, that their spend is up by 15% on home repairs and improvements to £2,608 on average per household. Some of that will be DIY, but our numbers show that's around 20% of the market. The vast majority will want to go online, find a great tradesperson, nowhere better to go. 28% of customers went online to find a trade over the pandemic period. 60% of that volume came into Checkatrade. We grew our web visits by 23% to 29 million over the last year, and we're seeing that growth continuing.
All right, Richard, we've got to leave it there. Good to see you again. Thanks very much for joining me. That's all for today's show. Please remember to follow or subscribe to the podcast, and you can leave a review. For more business news and analysis, check out the Sky News app. Until next time, thanks for listening.